You're listening to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast, episode 19, hosted by me, Robert Plotkin. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, an internationally recognized clinical psychologist, school consultant, and award-winning author of The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age, which examines how today's technology and media change how children learn and grow, and explains how parents and educators can reap the benefits of technology while reducing the risks it poses to children at every stage of their development. We're extremely pleased to welcome Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast. Hi, Dr. Steiner Adair, and welcome to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.
Thank you.
It's really great to have you here, and I'd like to talk about the work that you specialize in relating to children and use of technology. I mean, today, children seem to be glued to screens of all kinds all the time, and wondering if you can talk a bit about starting with how that has changed over the years, and particularly because you've been doing this kind of work for a very long time.
Well, one of the biggest changes I see, and one of the most frequent questions I get from parents, the question is, what's the right age to give your child a smartphone? And one of the biggest changes I see is that children are being given fully loaded computers, i.e. smartphones, at an increasingly younger age. When I started doing research for the book, there was pretty much a consensus that, 8th grade or 9th grade was the age at which kids should get a fully loaded smartphone. And now, depending on where I am, I travel all over the country working in different kinds of schools and with kids and parents and educators. I've seen places where it's not uncommon for 3rd or 4th graders to have fully loaded smartphones. So I think that's a big difference. And with more and more people having phones, we've developed very different cultural norms, some just within the last 5 years, that are really changing how we connect to each other.
So what kind of a difference does that make? For example, what kind of changes do you see in children's behavior, attitudes, or development as a result of them having this access to smartphones at a younger age?
Well, we see all sorts of differences. If a child comes home from school and is in the habit constantly of playing a game, regardless of the kind of game, obviously a good Minecraft game for some kids is a lot better than Candy Crush, but even Minecraft can cause challenges for some kids. What we see in children, particularly if they are given their parents' smartphones in the checkout line or in the car, is that we see a decline in their capacity for self-soothing, for frustration. We see an increase in impulsivity. We see a decrease in their ability for one of the most important things we want to see in young children, which is the capacity for deep play. And what deep play means is the ability to, be playing a game like dress up or something, and you come to a point where your narrative is run out, and you dive deeper into your little imagination and come up with another idea. You pick up a pot in a pan and turn it into a helmet or a sword or something, whatever it is. And there's an enormous difference between playing something as simple as dress up in the real world and playing it online. And when you play it online, you actually delete all the incredibly important and rich neurological, educational, psychosocial tools that kids develop when they play. And, we see significant differences between children who play a lot sitting on a couch using just their index finger, not developing fine motor coordination. We've seen a big spike in OT referrals in 4, 5, and 6-year-olds at school who need more occupational therapy because they're not actually just using their hand to build with real Legos or buttons or, lace things up. And we see, just certain deficits that when you stand back and think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
So you talked about a couple of the deficits being physical. What other kinds of deficits, mental or emotional or relational, might result from these changes?
So, when you play, let me stick with dress up because it's a fun example. When you play dress up with yourself, and you are telling yourself a story. You're making up a story in your own little head. And that's a wonderfully rich thing for pre-literacy and creative writing. And we see for children who play in the real world and we are read to by adults with real books, a much better language enriched entry point at nursery school or kindergarten. When you play dress up with a friend, unlike when you play it on an iPad, you learn how to co-create. And, in school, we talk about partner-based learning and project-based learning. Well, this is the beginnings of developing the social and emotional tools to be able to do that. You learn how to share. You learn how to discuss together what way the story is going to go. When you also play dress up in real life, things go wrong. Your boa slips off or, something happens. This is true when you're building a fort too versus building on Minecraft. You just can't hit a button that says reset. You have to build up, and that takes time and it takes patience. So we see kids when they play in the real world developing a very important tool for learning, which is the capacity to deal with frustration and disappointment. And what we see with kids who play a lot of games online is that they don't have as strong a capacity to both self-regulate, which means calm yourself down, and try and try and try again. So those are pretty important developmental milestones and tools that you want your children to develop. And of course, there are other things too. When you play a game like Dress Up online, you are playing in a realm that has some of the worst gender and racial stereotypes. And, and I guarantee you any king or queen or princess or dragon slayer or inventor or whatever your kids would make up on their own and outfit on their own would be more imaginative and creative than pushing, red stilettos or green sparkly stilettos, like that. And so when the magic of the iPad starts to replace the magic of playing in the real world, we see some real fallout for kids.
You've already addressed a bit of the next question I'm going to ask, but I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate and raise some arguments I'm sure you've heard many times, maybe even from parents, and maybe there are some parents out there who have said these things to themselves. One I've heard is, well, compared to television in the old days, 50s through the 90s, which was very passive for children.
Right.
The online world is meant to be very interactive and therefore does encourage a kind of creativity and engagement that was lacking from previous generations and therefore would encourage all kinds of cognitive and social development.
Mm-hmm. There's no question that, game playing and just being online can be phenomenally enriching for kids. I'm not saying it's always bad. I'm saying it's a question of degree and how much and where and what the content is. When it comes to the comparison between TV and playing, having your child, play online, there are several differences. When you play a handheld game, every time, and even if it's an educational one, like let's say you're matching lowercase a to uppercase a, your child will learn the difference between lowercase and uppercase a. But every time they get it correct, they usually get like butterflies or whistles, or sparkles. And those rewards are actual stimulants to their brain. So every time they do something right, they get these stimulants. And the human brain craves stimulants. So while on the positive side, they're, of course, learning certain things that are wonderful. The negative side is that they're being fed stimulants. And kids crave stimulants. It's one of the reasons that they love computers so much. We all crave stimulants. We all have a very hard time ignoring the ping on our phone, which is a stimulant to our brain. And so, you have to weigh some of the yays and nays. If what your child needs, if it's a rainy day and they've been indoors all day and they need something really engaging and something that's really intellectually more stimulating or interactive and creative, and they're into creating good stuff online, then let them do that. But if what you want your kids to do is have downtime and give their brains a break from the intensity of the neurological interaction with fast-paced games, let them watch a good video on TV. There's great content on both devices. One of the biggest differences is that TV is more relaxing. And TV occurs, usually unless you're watching Looney Tunes, the way people talk and interact is at the pace of human interaction. It's not so fast. And TV allows you to process along with it at a slower pace. And, sometimes we fall asleep in front of a TV. Mm-hmm. We rarely fall asleep unless you're, been gaming for 3 days in front of playing Candy Crush. So, and the other things that are worthy of noting, TV doesn't produce the same kind of eye strain on kids, and it doesn't produce the same kind of, computer neck or whatever you want to call it. Physically, it's different. Your kids aren't sitting at a computer for 2 or 3 hours hunched over a screen. But there certainly are times where playing at a game on the computer is a great thing, or pursuing a hobby or learning more about something you love is on a computer is a fabulous thing to do. It's a question of how much and what and where and when.
Well, that's a great way to get into that discussion. If it's not really either or choosing television versus screen, other kinds of screens, or no technology at all, I'm sure parents and educators want to know, well, how do we then strike a balance? I mean, I know that's a very complicated question, but I wonder if you could start to answer that or give some ideas for, in different contexts, how to try to strike that balance over time for children as they develop.
Well, as they develop, I myself am a fan of only using computers or smartphones for face chatting with children. Or some of the really good slow-paced animal videos and, the things that are similar to Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers. And when kids are little, I think that playing in the real world just can't be beat, although I think Skyping with your grandchildren is divine. I'm a huge fan. So the biggest thing, honestly, to think about is each child individually. Because one of the things that we see a huge variance with is how different children and different kids' wiring interacts with being on computers. There are some kids who could leave it or take it. They do it at school. They come home. They're not running to their family laptop or, an iPad. There are other kids who are racing through their homework to be able to play Minecraft or get online and, run a raid on their game, whatever it is, or go on Snapchat and check their streak, whatever it is. One of the most important things is to really understand your child's wiring and how they emotionally toggle on and toggle off. And if you have a kid who loves gaming, and in fact is very good at it, that's a more challenging situation than the kid who can, leave it or take it. And it's really important to pay attention to your child's what they love about it and how much they dysregulate when they get off of technology or stop gaming. I was really challenged and started thinking about this issue way before the book when my son was in 7th grade and got Windows 98. And he was a very talented gamer. And it took me a long time to figure out how to raise a talented gamer without him becoming addicted to gaming, make sure he still had a soul and a sweetness to him, that didn't get deleted because he was such a good gamer. And how to also take advantage and nurture what was clearly a talent that he had that's, a very valuable one in this day and age. He works in the gaming industry right now.
Well, then, what was the magic answer that you found to that question?
Several, after many meltdowns and arguments, I honestly, as a parent, I would vacillate. I wasn't easy either. Because on the one hand, I was so proud of, this acumen that he had in this brave new world. And it brought him a lot of social capital. He could help his teachers and he could help his friends. And this is in the days where you could beat a game. And he beat, I forget what Command and Conquer, one of those games. And, that was pretty exhilarating and cool. And then I'd flip to the other side, like, this game is destroying my son. I'm terrified he's going to get addicted. Because I'm trained both as a developmental and clinical psychologist, I was very aware that there was something powerful going on between his brain and the computer, but there was no research then, which is part of why I wanted to write the book, because now there's a lot of research and we really need to pay attention to it. So here are some of the things that we found to be helpful. Depending on your child, what I would say is a day on, a day off of gaming, or no gaming at all, Monday through Thursday, because that's the school week and we do schoolwork. You decide what works best for you. And then I sought out robotics teams for him to compete on, and that was fabulous. He was on a multi-age robotics team where he was the young kid. There was a college age, there was a graduate student, and a couple of adults. They got to compete. They went to Disney World. That was thrilling. So just being around other people who were coding and creating content and being in a multi-generational sort of design thinking space was wonderful for him. By the time he was in 11th or 12th grade, I think maybe perhaps both, his school couldn't offer him classes, but what they did do is they asked him to teach computer sciences to middle school students. So that was another way of sort of channeling this in a pro-social and give back and instructional sort of academic-y kind of way. We also made sure that in the summer, he had several weeks in the wilderness, completely off and away from all devices. That was also really important. And we would, try and punctuate the week also with family time for all of us off screens, which I'm a huge fan of. And I think for kids today, the more you can take advantage of vacations, and especially summer vacations, and put yourselves as a family, or certainly your children, in a context where they will be with other kids, having a blast. Daniel went to one of those wonderful canoeing camp in Vermont, Keewaydin, where they would go out in the wilderness for several weeks. I mean, you develop such rich friendships and you reconnect with yourself and nature and the stars and your soul. And you also give your brain a very necessary break. And we know every day we need to give our brains a break. I didn't let kids play on their screens in the car, because that's not good for you on your way to school. You want to just stare out the window, let your brain rest, deal with your anticipatory anxiety, prepare yourself for school. If you play Candy Crush, you'll arrive at school coming off a stimulant. You won't be as pro-social. You'll be a little more agitated, have a harder time settling down. And we try and create I recommend for families for sure that you have some tech-free zones in your house. The dinner table is an obvious one, although surprising how hard that is for many families to maintain. And then I would also recommend that you take your living room or some room and have that be a place where no screens of any kind are welcome. Because if you're sitting around the living room or you're playing Monopoly, we were a family that played a lot of card games and board games. One person picks up the phone, or then suddenly everybody else is reaching for theirs, because stimulants have a contagious effect, and it's really hard to resist. First you feel annoyed when somebody, whether it's me doing it or one of my kids taking a call, and then suddenly everybody else is doing it. And so you really have to work much harder today to protect times for family connection, as well as connection with yourself.
I'm just curious to know, whether you found that it was you as a parent who were primarily taking the lead on that, or did there come a point at which your kids were also managing themselves more? Did you find that they internalized this over time? And I'm making some assumption that in the beginning, and maybe I'm wrong, that in the beginning they resisted.
Yeah, they definitely resisted, and we came up with ways of trying to make it more appealing, but then things sort of flipped, and there have been many times where our kids have called us out and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Yeah, I remember one Thanksgiving vacation, I had scheduled a work call when I knew we were going to be in the car, and they were like, "What's up with that?" Don't be a hypocrite. So,
well, what did you do?
I rescheduled it. They were right. Fortunately, it was the kind of thing I could reschedule. So I am no saint. I think, it's very, very hard to self-regulate with all this stuff.
And now let's talk about how hard it is to do when, your family isn't an island, obviously. I mean, how do you deal with the fact that other kids are being raised or in different ways, or your kids are facing other influences when it comes to technology? How did you deal with that?
This is a huge thing. We had to deal with this with TV and movies too. Would I let my kids go to a birthday party where they were going to watch an X-rated movie? That came up. So there are always going to be situations where your family values are going to conflict with other family values. And this is particularly hard around the question of giving your kids in middle school fully loaded smartphones or access to Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook, all of which have a 13-year-old age requirement. And I think what you really have to figure out is what kind of childhood you want your kids to have, what you think they are capable of handling socially, and where you come down on the value of crafting, if you will, a sequenced approach to adulthood versus just, handing kids access to the entire adult world in 5th grade or 6th grade. And most of all, what kinds of sort of social and emotional and cognitive, if you will, or neurological development you want to foster for your children. It's very hard. Parents have a very hard time setting good limits. There's a wonderful new app out that, is sort of a parental dream come true called The Circle, which Disney owns. So you get, Disney ads and stuff. But The Circle is great because it allows you to see every single and set and establish who your kids can text, what time they can do, what websites they're on, what they have access to. It gives parents more control than any other app I'm aware of. Maybe you're aware of another one. But I think that one of the biggest mistakes parents make is when kids say, but everybody else has it. And let's say your child's in 5th grade or 6th grade. And if you cave to the idea that because everybody else's child has it, you're basically saying several things to your children. One is that you don't believe they can withstand peer pressure, which is not the message you want to give kids, because soon everybody else is going to have weed or alcohol or, whatever else. And also you're telling them you don't have faith in their ability to still be connected to their friends and have a good time and not have, what everybody else has. And you're also sort of, one of the best things we do for our children when we do set limits that perhaps not other families have is it gives them a very strong sense of their family. And, all the research on what makes kids take risks or have better self-esteem come round to parents who set good limits based on their values and explain to their children why they're doing what they're doing. And it's the transparency and the explaining that's so important. And, there are so many phones out there aside from smartphones for children, if you want your kids to be able to text 4 or 5 of their friends, you can limit a phone like that. If you want them just to be able to text you, there are kid phones that don't have access to the entire World Wide Web. You can put all sorts of restrictions on a phone.
Yeah, it's another way, it sounds like, in which you're encouraging people to not succumb to the idea that they have to choose all or nothing, that there are some middle grounds out there.
There are some middle grounds, but I'm a fan of the wait till 8 movement. I mean, your kids can have a phone, they can have a flip phone, but I think it's not a wise thing to let children go on sites that they are too young for legally. And it's not a wise thing for parents to tell their kids they're special and we're going to break the law.
Mm.
And I think it's a good thing to have a pace at which children grow up and enter the adult world. And, there's once, if kids really want to, I mean, I certainly know plenty of 7th and 8th graders who have all sorts of accounts their parents are clueless of. They say, okay, here's my Instagram account, but they have a Finsta, they have a fake Insta,
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's pretty tiresome to try and stay on top of all of this. And most people don't even know, how to begin to stay on top of it all. So I think there are many things to think about. But the one thing I will say is whenever you get your child a phone, or, it's not just a phone, they can do stuff on Chromebooks, they can do it on, iTouch, they can do it on their laptop. Make sure you have a family contract and an understanding about what this is for and what it is not for. Taking embarrassing pictures, starting rumors, pretending to be somebody you're not, and what the consequences will be when you mess up. And just assume your kids are going to mess up. They're works in progress. We all mess up. But really have an ongoing dialogue about here's what it's for, here's what it's not for, here are family values, and we're going to check up on you and make sure that you're using this appropriately.
Yeah, this is really great set of suggestions for parents. We've been talking so far mostly about the perspective of parents raising kids, but I know that you also do a lot of work directly with schools. Kids spend what percentage of their waking lives at school?
They spend more percentage on screens than anything else right now, including sleep. And they spent, I don't know, 5-6 hours a day at school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a huge change. The way kids experience school, I mean, it's changed in so many ways. And the experience of going to school is completely flipped from when we went to school.
What are the challenges that you find professionals at school, teachers, principals, other professionals there, and what are you finding are the big challenges now that you're being asked to help them with?
Well, everybody was all excited about all the very real advantages of being able to use technology in a classroom and Chromebooks that go home and doing research, online. And I think everybody sort of fell in love without having the research or any awareness of the downside that we might run up against. And right now, most people are struggling with serious questions about how to reboot how they use technology in school. Some of the typical questions and things I help schools look at are, what's the right amount of screen time in this class, in this child's day, for homework? What kind of work is best done off a device? We don't read on an iPad the same way we read from a book. We don't learn when we are keyboarding notes as well as when we handwrite certain kinds of notes. So then, we have all sorts of research now to know that we have to be much more focused and differentiated in how we use technology. Something as simple as just having your phone on your desk at home or in the classroom will undermine your capacity to pay attention. And obviously the issues of if kids are on their own devices, and this can happen whether it's a school device too, depending on what kind of limits schools place and what the device is. How do you know a kid's not at J. Crew or texting the kid next to them in class. And that's a huge problem. And we have a big problem with parents who email and text their kids during the day, which you should never do. It's distracting. Often it gets them in trouble. It leads to them feeling anxious. Let your children have their school day. One of the good things about school is you're away from your parents for a couple of hours. And, it's not good for parents either, because your child texts you. They're all upset. Their math teacher did this. Their English teacher did that. Then your day gets hijacked too, because you're worrying about your child and you don't see the recovery that happens. And or when you get involved, you're depriving your child of one of the most important things they need to learn at school. And that is how to go up to the teacher and say, I'm really disappointed, or this isn't fair, how to advocate for themselves. Teachers are so good at helping children express themselves when they're upset. And you don't want to deprive your kids of the opportunity to learn how to advocate for themselves and benefit from that aspect of, having relationships with their teachers. Other things like using your phone in the cafeteria. Should devices be in cafeterias? What about in the hallways? What about on the quad at school? What about parents using their devices in the hallways? These are all things that are up for grabs and being considered because of research.
Are we at the point yet where there's any confident conclusions being drawn from this research about what the best practices are? And let's say within schools.
Sure. So there's a school in New York City, they're one of the top girls' schools in New York City, read The Big Disconnect and read some of the research on the impact of smartphones in terms of distraction and social distraction and FOMO, fear of missing out, and anxiety. And they decided that there's actually no reason whatsoever for girls, whether they're in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, to have a phone with them during the school day that is distracting, that it will undermine their learning. And so they, based on the research, sent a letter out to their students and their parents explaining why they are going to ask their girls, their students. And this is a very highly rigorous, wonderfully connected in terms of teachers and students school in New York City, girls' school, to not have their phones on them during the day. And more and more schools are coming to either the same conclusion, or if there's a class where for some reason, and sometimes there is a reason, students use technology in the classroom. They have one of those shoe bags, where you put your phone in a shoe bag and then you take it out when we're going to use it for academic purposes, but it goes back in the shoe bag rather than back on your desk, rather than back under your desk where you can text without being seen by your teacher. So these are really big changes. And what's so hard about it, and Robert, my heart goes out to teachers. I was a teacher. I taught at Phillips Academy Andover. I was a school psychologist there. Especially when you're working with adolescents, it's so hard to strike that balance between being a teacher and being sort of a coach and mentor, and also having to set limits. And one of the things teachers say that they really hate is having to be like the tech police. And I think that more and more when I work with schools are developing ways of engaging parents so everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same understanding. And when you have a school responsible use contract and parents come to school and talk about it and sign it with you, and things like in middle school, if your kids come home from middle school with a Chromebook or a school iPad, more and more schools are putting in the responsible use agreement that parents will collect the device at 9:00 or 9:30 or whatever time you pick. And this is so helpful to everybody. It's helpful because all the kids can't say, but everybody else is online. And it teaches them time management because they can't do their homework until 10:30 or 11 and be on 2 or 3 devices at once. And it helps them learn how to focus and get their homework done without distraction, which is one of the biggest challenges middle schoolers and high schoolers face. And it also takes the wind out of the parent-child, really unpleasant, can I just have 15 more minutes, or what about a half hour? You're the worst mom in the world kind of stuff. So we've lost the boundary between home and school in several ways. So we have to rethink how to strengthen the relationship. So we use tech as an ally to strengthen our school-home relationships. And that's some of the exciting work I'm doing in schools around the country.
It's interesting. I had framed this last question as being about switching from focusing on the parents to the school. And a lot of what you ended up talking about really was how schools and parents need to interact or collaborate with each other.
Yes, much more. And, I think one of the things schools are experiencing is, and it's very understandable, it's totally understandable, is that parents are much more anxious, and they're very anxious about technology and what's on these things. And how do I know if my child really needs to have their phone on while they're on their Chromebook doing homework, et cetera? And one of the things I think schools need to do much more, devote much more time and effort to, is parental outreach and education. Because it's not realistic to expect all parents to understand what filters are, how to protect your kids from porn pop-ups, how to understand when your kids are conning you, which by middle school most kids will do and want to do and try to do, which is developmentally quite normal. And also, when new apps come out like Snapchat or Yik Yak or Kik or whatever it is, Vimeo, GarageBand, Musical.ly, it's helpful for parents to hear from the school. Here's what it is. Here's what's good. Here's what's not so good. Here's the age it's recommended for. Here are some examples of kids who are using it well. Here are some examples we've seen of kids getting in trouble with it. And certainly bring it to parents' attention if there's an age requirement. So there's more work to be done in the digital age, in educating parents and getting them to the place where they feel less like immigrants in their kids' brave new world.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe in part because kids are using the same technology in home and in school, or bringing their phones back and forth. And because the technology, as you pointed out, develops so rapidly,
yes,
really couldn't expect any individual parent to keep up with it all.
Right. No, only the parents who keep up with it are the parents whose work teaches them to or requires it of them. They're very tech savvy. And, there are some parents who are really good at using Google, going to sites like Common Sense Media, going to safetykids.net, going to, some of the wonderful sites online that can teach you as a parent how to parent better, and be more savvy about all this. But, one of the other things that I would say when you ask me what's changed because of technology for children, for me, the most overwhelming and sad finding in the research when I interviewed 1,000 children between the ages of 4 and 18, and then 250 kids between the ages of 18 and 30, was how consistently, it didn't matter whether a child was 2 or 6 or 12 or 22, how consistently kids of all ages talked about feeling so frustrated at home when they need their parents, and their parents are digitally distracted.
Mm.
And that's something that is really important for parents to understand. And it's very hard. And when I work with kids, I was at a wonderful school in Connecticut 2 days ago. I was working with the fifth and sixth graders and 7th and 8th graders, and the high school kids too. I help them understand neurologically what's going on for their parents. Kids ask me all the time, like, why do my parents text and drive? And then we say it's so dangerous. And then they get mad and they say, this is work. Be quiet. I'm an expert driver. Don't be rude.
Mm-hmm.
And some parents say, oh, honey, you're so right. Take this away from me. And some say, okay, you finish, you text for me, But what I explain to these kids, because it's very baffling, they're doing the right thing. They're saying, this is not safe. I don't feel safe. And that's what we teach them in school to do, right? When you're around somebody doing something risky or unkind, be an upstander, say something. And then their parents, by and large, more often than not, get angry at them. So I teach them about what happens to our brains when we're texting and why everything seems urgent and why, the more primitive part of your brain hijacks your prefrontal cortex and why we reach for our phones and the bad stimulants and all that stuff. But most of all, I want to reassure the kids, too, that their parents, of course, they love them, even though it doesn't feel like it. And kids talk so often and often using the same examples about how they just feel like they're boring to their parents. They're not interesting. Your parent comes to pick you up, they get in the car and they're talking to somebody else on Bluetooth. That hurts. It hurts. So I think as parents also, we have to really kind of push the pause button and rethink and reboot how we use technology with our children as well.
It sounds to me like it really puts the lie to this idea that because kids today have only grown up using this technology, that it feels totally normal to them. I mean,
no,
it sounds like you're saying kids have an innate sense that there is something wrong, not wrong with it, but that feels wrong in their relationship with their parents when their parents are acting this way.
Well, they say it feels wrong and it is wrong. Because at times it is, a child, kids will say things like, I'm so grateful to my mom and my dad. They work so hard and I'm so proud of them. And, I get to go to a great school and, we go on vacations and they're really special and wonderful, but it's also really awful and hurtful. And it makes me mad when we're on the ski lift. And I have to say to my dad, come on, Dad, can you please not text when we're on the ski lift? Is there any time like family stuff comes first? And, the kids are right in some of those circumstances. And, we have to be more transparent and say, this is work, this isn't work. But by fifth, sixth, seventh grade, kids know whether it's work or not sometimes, especially when we're fudging. And you really have to, we too, just like children, need to learn how to use their notifications to put up Do Not Disturb, to use apps like Freedom, Freedom from Distractibility, to use Circle Time themselves. Parents need to do the same thing.
That's really, really very insightful. And, we touched a little bit on the impact of technology on relationships for children. And preparing for this, I had made a long list of potential impacts. We've just really skim the surface of many of them. I'm sure we could keep talking. I mean, one that comes to mind is there's been so much press attention lately to, I think it's fair to call it epidemic of anxiety and depression among teenagers. Yep. And I'm sure you're much more familiar with the research than I am, but I have seen it linked specifically to technology use.
Yes. Well, in my research, I have seen it linked specifically, and certainly in my practice as a therapist, to technology use. But I think there are other reasons kids are very anxious today. And I think, when you look at things that are going on in the world, it is a pretty scary world. And then when you have a president who uses this technology as a tool to tweet hate and lies and racist and sexist things, the very things we're teaching kids and working so hard to teach them how to be good digital citizens. The world's topsy-turvy when grown-ups are getting away doing this stuff. And here we are telling kids, be an upstander, don't do this, etc. Everywhere I go, children ask me, if we would get kicked out of school or sent home or have a DC, a disciplinary, committee meeting if we did some of the things we see the grown-ups doing. And this is serious. It's really serious. You have to wonder, what is going on? And, the other causes of anxiety are the sense that, the things that used to be taken for granted, or securities we used to think we had, whether it's, related to this new tax bill or to the immigrant situation, immigrant laws, or what's happening with the economy and the bigger divides between the haves and have-nots. Kids are very savvy, and we live in a new saturated world. And those things cause anxiety too, and they're very real. And they're very real when their parents are very anxious about their own family's safety and security. But there's also no question that kids live with a very, very different kind of social anxiety than we grew up having. And one of the biggest differences for kids today is that when we went to school, the drama happened at school. And then you go home, and home is kind of boring. Mm-hmm. My parents, your parents are nice, they're lovely, they'll ask you a few questions. You talk on your phone, to your best friend, but it was kind of a quiet sanctuary. Now, kids have the experience of going to school where the grown-ups actually pay often more attention to them than the grown-ups at home do. And then they go home, and they're on 2 or 3 devices, and they are connected to every kid in their school if they want to be, and people all around the world, and they're watching funny or icky YouTube videos, and they're struggling with what they call and what we've termed FOMO, fear of missing out. And the pressure and the anxiety that comes with wanting to know who's saying what, who's doing what, what's trending, and the fear that someone's going to tag you in an embarrassing picture or not tag you in a party picture is huge. And that's just the tip of sort of the source of anxiety. But we've seen a spike in general anxiety, social anxiety, perfectionism, social avoidance, all sorts of things that are tied to the very image-based and social media, social networking site-based, hours and hours and hours that kids spend online when they're home. They spend more hours, some kids spend more hours multitasking, which of course doesn't imply they're doing everything equally well, but on several screens at once, than any other activity in their life, including sleep. I think that was the Pew Research study that said that. Now that is a phenomenally radical change in the experience of being adolescents at a time in development where it's hard enough without all this stuff. Now, let me speak to the flip side of that, because there's always good and bad. For kids who are growing up in families where their families are rejecting of who they are, whether it's their sexual fluidity or their political beliefs or whatever, being able to connect to people who validate them, it can be life-saving. So it's not all bad what kids are doing online. The majority of it is actually good. The research that I know comes down to about, somewhere between 60 and 80% is either boring, stupid, friendly, helpful, life-saving. It's just that the bad stuff can be really bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate the kind of balanced perspective you're providing. I know certainly in the early years of the internet, I remember most of the message that was going out from thinkers in education and pundits was, I found, very one-sided. Covered
Mm-hmm.
what were real benefits of internet and computer use, but
Mm-hmm.
without talking about the other side, which now we see is really, really real.
Yeah, it's very real. It's very real. And, my experience in especially talking to middle schoolers, but especially high schoolers, I'm standing in front of, 400 or 500 kids sometimes, when I just give them research in a thoughtful way and say to them, look, you're the boss of your brain. You can outsmart anything your parents will do, although the circle makes it harder. Most parents don't want to do that with their high school kids. But, it's really up to you to think about, are you developing your creative, cognitive, social capacities? Are you protecting your future? Are you protecting your ability to fall in love and have a tender, loving, wonderful, intimate relationship, because you need to do that if that's what you want. And I think those are conversations we just need to have so much more with children, and especially with adolescents, and treat them like, the young, thoughtful people they are.
I think this is a good segue into talking about the perspective of children, let's say focus on adolescents in particular. We started talking mostly about parents, then educators, and not really addressing the children themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, from your work, you just gave a little taste of what you say to children. I wonder what other perspective or advice or suggestions you could give to any adolescents, say, who are struggling with any of these issues, who have an awareness that they want things to change in a positive direction. What would you say to them?
Oh boy,
it's a big question. I know
it's a big question. Well, kids are using screen-based communications to, figuratively or metaphorically say hi to somebody that they might not feel confident saying hi to face. The most important thing is then to do it in the hallway at school and to follow up on it, and not to let prolonged text talk replace human voice-to-voice talk. And we communicate so differently online, particularly in texting, than we do when we're with a person face to face. And you have to explain that to kids, because to them it just feels the same. I pick up my phone, I'm texting. What's the difference between talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of differences. There are differences in our capacity for empathy, and we take risks when we are texting that we usually wouldn't take face to face, and we lose. Our filter disappears. And so when you teach them sort of the neurological implications of some of this, then invite them to think about, what makes for really good friendships. What is a good friendship? What it makes a relationship feel really precious to you, and how do you develop those capacities to be vulnerable? And one of the saddest things I heard from the 18 to 30-year-olds when I talk to them is they're saying, we're so connected, we can text, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., it doesn't matter, but we're really bad at falling in love. You text, hey, what's up? That's a booty call. You haven't even got for a drink, and that's very different from saying to somebody, I really like you because I really want to hang out more. I want to get to know you more. Or calling a friend and saying, hey, I'm really sad. Do you think you could come over? It's those huge, hard moments of mature vulnerability and authenticity that are so critical for people having really, good friendships and relationships. And we need to encourage that and create it and make spaces for it. A lot of my work in schools, going back to that for a sec, is to really change advisory and really rethink, are we creating sanctuaries and safe places for kids to talk about themselves and what goes down online, and to use the language they use online in talking about what goes down online in school? There's such a big disconnect between the way kids communicate online and at school. And yet very few schools allow for kids to, in an authentic way, talk about all the stuff that's so hard. Teaching them the art of difficult conversations, teaching them about, love and sort of the pretend you don't care Olympics and all that stuff that are, dynamics that are just hurtful to kids, and they want out of it. That, most of them want out of it. Somewhere between 60 plus kids want really good intimate relationships. They're not hooking up. That's all very exaggerated. And you need to tell them that, because then they won't feel pressure to do things that they absolutely don't want to do.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the need to be able to engage in those hard conversations or interactions, I mean, before uh, all of the online communication, to a large extent, kids didn't have any choice but to engage in those face to face.
That's right. You would meet somebody, you would meet up, you'd have pizza, you'd bring your friends for cover, but you'd meet up. And now, I think we see signs, some of the social anxiety. I mean, there are many reasons this college culture exists, and it's a very, very unhealthy one. But, by the time, for many kids, not all kids, but some kids, when they go off to college, they pregame and do shots of alcohol and then kind of hook up, and because they don't know how to flirt and how to just hang out and how to manage the excitement and the awkwardness of meeting people in a social context. And we are really letting our kids down in that way. I think it's pretty serious.
Mm-hmm. I mean, part of what we're talking about indirectly is just the need for there to be this dialogue, but also guidance across the generations, instead of there being such a divide where kids and adolescents are kind of trying to figure out everything about how to live on their own.
Yes, I think that's very true. It's so ironic. We're such a sex-saturated culture. Kids are watching porn, and it's not just pornography, it's gornography. It's violent, it's sadistic, and it's, pornographic. But we have gag rules about teaching a sex-positive approach to love and intimacy in schools. I mean, we really need to revisit that. Not sure when it's going to happen, but it would be a good thing if we did. The private schools are doing it. And, we really need to rethink what belongs in the core curriculum in the digital age.
On that note, I wonder what you see as the cutting edge or the next step, perhaps, in the curriculum or ways of educating kids in the digital age. Is there something new on the horizon based on your experience and your counseling practice and the research that you've done and studied? Is there something, and I don't want to say this to be Pollyannish, but something hopeful on the horizon in light of all
there are absolutely hopeful things on the horizons. I think, and it depends on where you live and what your state requirements are, et cetera. The school, independent schools, private schools have the luxury of being able to create the courses they want. But I would say overall, the biggest and most exciting changes that I am seeing, beginning kindergarten through 12th grade, is that educators are realizing, first of all, that in order to learn cognitively, a child's health and well-being is about 50% of the process. You cannot learn if you're anxious, if you're sleep deprived. So more and more schools are listening to the imperative to, in a very different way, teach health and wellness, mindfulness, teach kids about tech use and tech health and wellness, not just how to protect, your privacy, which is also critically important, but really, how to manage technology for yourself and your friends. And I think digital citizenship and teaching kids how to have courageous conversations or difficult conversations around issues of diversity and equity and inclusion. And certainly more and more schools are teaching young people about the signs of anxiety and how to help a friend when they have it, and teaching them a lot more about adolescent development, so that they can help one another out and get help sooner if they should be, experiencing some psychological distress. And I think some of the, what I see schools doing more and more, it's certainly the work I'm doing in schools, is schools are developing a class the kids take every year that's just as important as math and science or social studies. And it's about leadership and health and well-being. And it combines a whole bunch of stuff: ethics, character education, philosophy. And I think so many of our models of education, rote memory, what we used to think kids absolutely need to know are actually kind of outdated. They don't need to know a lot of the things, but they do need to know how to be a good person. And they need a lot of help learning how to relate, and a lot of help learning how to use technology in pro-social ways rather than harmful and antisocial ways. And they need a lot of help learning how to stay healthy when so many hours are potentially on screens, and how to manage those tensions between life online and life offline. And they need help learning how to stop meanness and social cruelty when they see it both in the hallway and on social networking sites, and also how to use these remarkable tools to help the world. I mean, the things that kids are inventing, and the startups and the service-based learning projects that are making a huge difference in the world that kids are doing today, to me, are beyond hopeful. They're brilliant, and they're extremely exciting and impressive and quite real. So there are some very wonderful things that we see schools providing opportunities for children to do, to excel, and to develop their most creative and healthy and competent selves.
That's really great. Thanks for sharing all of those ways in which you and professionals in schools and parents are working towards helping kids really achieve their full potential in a healthy way while using technology. I really appreciate you taking the time for all of your writing, for all of the work that you do. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It was really fun talking with you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us for this Technology for Mindfulness podcast with me, Robert Plotkin, and today's guest, Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, author of The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age. If you liked today's episode, please leave us a review on iTunes and share the episode with your friends. Those and all other links are in the show notes. And check out our blog at technologyformindfulness.com for information and tips about science, technology, and mindfulness. I'm Robert Plotkin, and I'll join you next time on the Technology for Mindfulness podcast with Victor Meyer-Schoenberger, the author of Delete, The Virtue of Forgetting in the Digital Age.